Adversaries are no longer confined to simply breaking through physical laboratory doors to extract our most critical and sensitive research. Welcome to episode 57 of the Weekly Roundup Deep Dive for July 31st, 2026. This week's intelligence reveals a connected web of structural vulnerabilities, stretching from military bases in Mons and university labs in Saskatchewan to campuses in London and Seoul. By synthesizing these seemingly isolated breaches, we can map Western research and development vulnerabilities into a distinct three-tiered taxonomy. Layer 1 involves the exploitation of human vectors and strategic partnerships. Layer 2 stems from the failure of digital baseline hygiene and reliance on legacy infrastructure. And Layer 3 exists on the bleeding edge of algorithmic theft and hardware circumvention. Viewing these threats through a single, holistic taxonomy is the only way security officers and policy professionals can accurately model the modern intellectual property threat landscape. The most porous entry points for adversarial intelligence gathering are rooted in the open nature of academic cultures. We see this directly in recent intelligence out of South Korea, detailing cases of foreign graduate students absconding with confidential research data. These actors specifically target high-value sectors like artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and battery technology. Their methodology relies on copying raw source code and research files, then immediately withdrawing from their university programs and leaving the country. Relying on standard non-disclosure agreements as the primary defense against state-incentivized intellectual property theft is an entirely insufficient control. This risk scales rapidly up to the institutional level. Take the UK government's Defence University Alliance, which includes Queen Mary University of London. A recent Telegraph investigation exposed Queen Mary's long-running partnership with the Beijing University of Posts and Telecommunications. This arrangement creates severe national security friction, as BUPT maintains direct, documented links to China's military and defense research apparatus. To counter these exposures, Western institutions are actively trying to construct highly vetted, trusted corridor partnerships. One model for this is the newly signed agreement between the University of Saskatchewan and the International Atomic Energy Agency. This pact secures global collaboration specifically around USASC's specialized focus in nuclear medicine, energy, and advanced waste management. Another example of corridor building is Israel's current push to pitch technology partnerships to Canada, moving forward despite deep diplomatic tensions over the Middle East. Israel is offering collaborations in advanced cybersecurity and digital health, specifically proposing a hospital-at-home model that relies on remote monitoring technologies. Academia requires openness to forge these global innovation corridors, but if left unvetted, that openness becomes the mechanism used for intellectual property transfer. Moving down our taxonomy, we reach Layer 2, digital baseline infrastructure. Advanced persistent threats rarely need to utilize sophisticated zero-day exploits because universities frequently leave basic digital hygiene unchecked. A stark indicator of this is a recent JISC cybersecurity report tracking stolen credentials currently circulating on the dark web. This chart shows compromised logins escalating over 12 months. Over 14,400 UK education and research credentials were stolen in just 1 year. The primary vector is infostealer malware, infecting unmonitored personal laptops and phones brought onto the network. This failure of zero-trust architecture extends to traveling researchers, as detailed in a recent ReliaQuest investigation analyzing public Wi-Fi targeting. Hackers are actively compromising the exposed, poorly secured management interfaces of Wi-Fi gateways at hotels and conference centers. Once inside, the attackers alter the local DNS settings, redirecting researchers to spoofed Microsoft 365 pages, where their work credentials are systematically harvested. In more complex attacks, they abuse the web proxy auto-discovery protocol to intercept broader network traffic. This tricks the user into approving device code authentication requests, giving the attacker account access without ever needing the actual password. These endpoint vulnerabilities are symptomatic of broader, systemic infrastructure rot across critical sectors, a dynamic highlighted in a new report from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. ASPI notes that nearly 40% of actively targeted cyber vulnerabilities affect end-of-life, unsupported legacy devices still operating on active networks. Spending millions to secure a physical laboratory is meaningless if the data itself is accessible through unpatched legacy endpoints and assumed trust external networks. That brings us to the final layer of our taxonomy, the algorithmic and hardware frontier. According to a Reuters investigation, Chinese military researchers have found a reliable method to bypass U.S. export restrictions on artificial intelligence models. They execute a workaround called model distillation. Outputs from restricted U.S. models are piped directly into smaller domestic systems for training. This clones the reasoning capabilities of powerful models, bypassing the need for original training data or massive compute hardware. This tactic sits at the center of the debate surrounding open-weight AI, intensified by China's recent release of the Kimi K3 model. In open-weight systems, the underlying parameters are publicly accessible. Developers favor this approach because it offers greater flexibility, total transparency, and significantly lower operational costs. But it creates an inherent security paradox. Releasing those weights publicly removes the developer's ability to enforce safety guardrails against malicious adaptation. The severity of this risk scales rapidly as models gain capability, highlighted by Anthropic's Claude Mythos preview and its recent testing breakthroughs in cryptography. During testing, the AI autonomously discovered novel attack methods against a reduced version of the advanced encryption standard, operating exponentially faster than human cryptographers. While commercial encryption in use today remains secure, the model also identified flaws in HAWK, a proposed post-quantum cryptographic standard. This demonstrates the long-term threat advanced neural nets pose to digital security architectures. The physical hardware frontier faces similar friction. The Federal Communications Commission has just banned imports of new foreign-made humanoid robots. The FCC's national security rationale asserts that advanced, subsidized robots could covertly map critical infrastructure and siphon sensitive supply chain data back to Beijing. However, physical embargoes frequently prove porous, as evidenced by Russia's ongoing circumvention of Western technology sanctions. Data from Strider indicates that Russia successfully imported roughly 50,000 controlled dual-use goods simply by routing them through complex Indian supply chains. Traditional perimeter defenses, whether physical hardware embargoes or API access limits, are proving entirely insufficient against algorithmic emulation and shadow supply chains. When we zoom out, we can view the complete, holistic threat landscape we've mapped across these three layers. An attack rarely stays in one layer. It cascades. It might start at layer 2, utilizing a single network credential harvested from a compromised hotel Wi-Fi gateway. That digital breach enables a layer 1 exploit. An international researcher utilizes that administrative access to quietly pull massive datasets, bypassing standard institutional checkpoints. The chain completes at layer 3. That exfiltrated data is routed overseas and used to distill a proprietary AI model for a foreign defense application. Broad regulatory responses, like the Trump-era limits on gain-of-function virology or the recent FCC robot bans, frequently lag behind these agile, multi-layered circumvention tactics. These threats permeate even the most heavily fortified multinational institutions. This week, a Canadian NATO intern was arrested on suspicion of spying for China while working in their IT department. The suspect previously held positions at the European Space Agency and the World Trade Organization, illustrating how fluid and interconnected the human attack surface remains. For university CISOs, principal investigators, and policy analysts, the takeaway is clear. Safeguarding modern innovation requires abandoning assumed trust entirely. Organizations must architect strict zero-trust protocols across their digital networks, international partnerships, and open-source integrations.